So this is a study by myself and Dr. Elisa Orofino, based at the Policing Institute of the Eastern Region. We're kind of collaborating in research looking at online extremisms, and this was a project that we were commissioned to do by the UK's Commission for Countering Extremism. Now, the project essentially looks at three extremist ideologies, and we're particularly looking at anti-government kind of extremist narratives and threat narratives, looking quite broadly at the period of 2019 to 2021, so pre, during, and hopefully after, he says, being at home because of COVID, after the pandemic. So we looked at three buckets of ideology and three groups kind of connected to that in the UK sphere, looking at Cage, Patriotic Alternative and Extinction Rebellion. And what we were kind of keen to kind of map is the extent to which anti-government extremist narratives are used, their potential for onboarding new recruits. What are some of the similarities and differences? What's the prevalence of anti-government extremist ideology within the narratives of the groups? And also we added a component looking at comparison between online and offline, so the extent to which offline mobilizations mapped onto online chatter, and the extent to which the kind of official cause of those demonstrations had a kind of prominent anti-government emphasis. So we partnered at ARU with the data science team here, and we conducted scraping of the main group accounts of each of the groups. Fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, for the public, we were able to collect data during the period that Patriotic Alternative was on Twitter. So we were quite, I don't say fortunate, but happy to be able to collect data. And we conducted a lot of topic modeling around the key categories of ideologies and narratives of these groups. We also looked at kind of forms of hard and soft recruitment. So soft recruitment being things like kind of baking competitions, maybe kind of movie nights, these sort of softer ones where ideology is involved, but it's not necessarily kind of a direct appeal to join the group itself. And we also did protest events analysis, which is basically coding offline events for where they took place, what was the rationale, were there any kind of actions of violence involved at the site of protest. And we did a bit of a qualitative deep dive, mainly as a sense check, to double check that the data being categorized was kind of valid and reliable by the computational models that we were using, but also to get a sense of the kind of the quality of anti-government narratives and narratives kind of more broadly. So in terms of the codebook and how we coded, particularly the anti-government narratives themselves, we kind of looked at four buckets of narratives to give us a bit of a focus. So we looked at strong state and anti-democratic sentiments, considering that basically that all man-made laws and systems of government, including democracies, were illegitimate. We also looked at specific animosities towards the UK government, so any manifestation of direct animosity towards employees or leaders of the UK government and UK institutions. We also looked at the use of kind of historical analogies, figures, and events, how they were kind of conspiratorially defined within the group's narratives, and maybe kind of revisionist alternative histories that might skew into more kind of anti-government sentiment. And then finally, any specific animosities towards UK law enforcement, yeah, of the community itself, agencies, how that kind of maybe mushroomed or diminished during and after the pandemic. So we used Elisa's three main frames framework to look at the structure of the narratives themselves, particularly these extremist groups revolving around an enemy to fight, victims to protect, and a change to achieve. And obviously the call of action being here kind of action against government and law enforcement, or the active kind of overthrow of the system itself. And what we were keen to do, and I think it's kind of quite rightly to say, is that we weren't looking at kind of legitimate critiques of government. We were looking at calls for insurrectionary violence and revolution within the discourse of these extremist actors, not just kind of everyday kind of critiques of the government. So in terms of the different ideologies, this looks differently. In terms of the eco-radical group that we're looking at, this might involve the kind of impending doom of the planet. For the white nationalist group, Patriotic Alternative, this might be the end of the white race, or this kind of conspiracy theory about white genocide. And for the extremismist group that we're looking at, this involve kind of very kind of strident and kind of vivid critiques of the kind of overreach or power of Western elites in foreign policy actions. And what we have to stress is that all of these groups didn't have a specific anti-government ideology per se. It was rather they were trying to mobilize anti-government sentiments. And what we also found was this was a kind of populist addition to their core appeal. So they were using narratives of fear and paranoia mainly to appeal to new recruits through this idea that the government was monitoring citizens, especially relevant during the period of COVID-19 and some of the lockdowns, and also this idea of kind of secret plot in terms of regulation against citizens and what they could do and couldn't do. So in terms of the results then, we found that all groups had shown some animosities towards the UK government during the time periods of 2019 to 2021. Hostile feelings against the government were usually justified by the incapacity of institutions to protect social groups. And this incapacity was often attributed to the corruption of politicians and their focus of materialism, which drifted them away from the broader good, in the eyes of these groups, the broader good of the community. All groups disseminated this idea of a conspiracy or hidden agenda against them that they alleged aimed to kind of protect a certain in-group, and this was kind of particularly exacerbated during the pandemic period. And in terms of single narratives, I think what was interesting is that we saw quite a kind of array of these narratives, specifically anti-government narratives, by the eco-radical group that we surveyed, Extinction Rebellion. So their anti-government narratives were made up of broader kind of anti-capitalist sentiments, anti-elite sentiments, calls for civil disobedience, and also element of anarchism in terms of how the group organized. And we found that, and this is perhaps not surprising, because during the period Extinction Rebellion were having a lot of attention by the police, and also having several thousands of arrests at protest action, but a very kind of strong animosity towards law enforcement. So in terms of conclusion, all groups showed specific animosity towards the UK government on Facebook and Twitter. But I would say that in terms of the UK picture, we're perhaps not at the level of other democracies, such as Germany or Australia, that have seen active plotting by particularly sovereign citizens movements, or in the US case, the presence of kind of anti-government militias. This is kind of at the level of kind of chatter online, rather than anything that might necessarily spill over into something that's more nasty. We did see one group called Alpha Men Assemble, but that was fairly small and low level. In terms of the differences between the groups, we saw differences in terms of soft and hard recruitment. So all of them used a mixture of both, but soft recruitment was evident, for example, in Cage, using free legal advice clinics, Quran recitations, and Ramadan-related events. In terms of Extinction Rebellion, this was related to vegan cooking, climate documentaries, and in relation to Patriotic Alternative, baking contests, film nights, and video game sessions with the leader of the group, Mark Collette. And we've concluded a similar study looking at slightly different groups, but can see in terms of the increase of soft recruitment, this has gone apace over hard recruitment over time. So it'd be an interesting one to monitor and look at in the future research. And then in terms of the ability of them to kind of organize and mobilize offline, we saw is that all groups were very quickly able to adapt after the pandemic circumstances. Extinction Rebellion offline mobilization were very different from Patriotic Alternative and Cage, both in terms of size, one particular protest having up to 15,000 participants, but also in terms of methods. So Patriotic Alternative tended to do leafleting and kind of banner drops with 2 or 3 activists, whereas Cage UK tended to be kind of offline kind of events at universities, not necessarily kind of protests. So that's a bit in terms of the study. In terms of our recommendations, we're very keen to look at some of these more kind of hateful extremist groups. So these are non-violent groups, obviously, but ones that kind of embolden people into more kind of violent or unlawful action. We're also looking, so in terms of that codification in the UK law of something around hateful extremism. We also think that as part of the counter-radicalisation prevent strategy in the UK, that there perhaps should be a separate stream to monitor anti-government extremism as a kind of key core focus as driver for people engaging and radicalising, and also kind of greater protection for government officials, lawmakers, and law enforcement officers. We keep on hearing kind of increased protection for them being needed, especially kind of sitting members of parliament. And I think this is also the case in the US, so perhaps enhanced protection around that. And then in terms of the research itself, we're hoping to do some more research looking at tracking between online anti-government signals, offline events. In terms of most of the groups, there wasn't kind of a very strong anti-government set of causes apart from Extinction Rebellion with their kind of civil disobedience agenda and actions. Also more research into soft recruitment, certainly increased attention to this on the far right, things like edible extremism, and also kind of lifestyle informed extremism, and more research on non-violent extremist infiltration of emerging crisis issues. As I said yesterday in the other presentation on AI, they have this kind of opportunistic pragmatism that they use to then kind of jump on key kind of emerging issues and events. So I think I'll wrap things up and leave things here. But thanks for your attention and for listening to me today. Thank you very much.